One afternoon in 1883, a woman presented herself at a Florentine hotel as the Countess von Hörnstein. The name was borrowed from her husband's morganatic lineage. The rooms were modest, the staff were polite. Nobody asked questions. Her actual name was Her Royal Highness Princess Mary Adelaide of Cambridge, Duchess of Teck, granddaughter of King George III, first cousin to the Queen of England. She was in Florence because her creditors, everyone from high-end Parisian couturers to the Richmond butchers who supplied her household, had run out of patience. Multiple lawsuits had been filed. Queen Victoria had refused, definitively and for the last time, to cover the debts. The family's parliamentary annuity had proven, once again, inadequate to sustain a princess's life. Her daughter May was 15 years old. She watched all of it. Mary Adelaide blew her own cover within weeks. She reverted to her actual title because the service and attention it commanded were significantly better. She couldn't, even in disgrace, quite give up being who she was. But for a brief period, one of the most blue-blooded women in Europe had checked into a foreign hotel under a borrowed name to escape the consequences of her own existence. The royalty that didn't pay the bills. The title that couldn't command the deference it promised. The humiliation absorbed quietly in someone else's city. Her daughter absorbed every detail of it. By 1910, that 15-year-old was Queen Mary. Her eldest son later described her as having veins full of ice. Courtiers called her severe. Her own children struggled to name what they felt around her. She refused visible emotion as a matter of policy. Historians have called it coldness for a century, and they're not wrong. They've just been explaining the symptom while ignoring the cause. The question isn't whether Queen Mary was cold. The question is where she learned that coldness was survival. Princess Mary Adelaide Wilhelmina Elizabeth was born on November 27, 1833, in Hanover, Germany, to Prince Adolphus, Duke of Cambridge, the youngest surviving son of George III, and Princess Augusta of Hesse-Kassel. In the genealogical architecture of Victorian Europe, she was exactly what she appeared, royal to the bone. Her Royal Highness by birth, granddaughter of the king who had ruled Britain for 60 years. Her first cousin, Princess Victoria of Kent, had ascended the British throne in 1837. When the Cambridges returned from Hanover that same year, the death of William IV having broken the personal union between Britain and Hanover, making the family no longer needed there, they settled at Kensington Palace. Mary Adelaide grew up within walking distance of the reigning monarch. She was family, not merely an allied branch. On paper, what this meant was everything. In the Victorian marriage market, a British princess with the blood of George III ran near the top of the available options. German princely houses actively sought such connections. The expectation for a woman of her position was a match somewhere in the middle ranks of European royalty. Not a throne, necessarily, but a substantial house, an established duchy, a consort's role with dignified income attached. In practice, what it meant was complicated by mathematics. When Mary Adelaide's father died in July 1850, Parliament had to debate the provision for his family. Lord John Russell stood in the House of Commons and laid it out. The Cambridge estate amounted to a small property at Combe Wood, generating around £1,200 a year. The income split 3 ways among the 3 children, with annuities on top that would absorb most of the Duke's share. The family required supplementary support. Parliament voted £12,000 a year to the new Duke of Cambridge, and separately established that the daughters, Princess Augusta and Princess Mary Adelaide, would each receive £3,000 a year at majority or marriage. That figure would later be revised upward for Mary Adelaide to £5,000 annually. Her mother, the Duchess of Cambridge, also contributed approximately £4,000 from her own funds each year. £9,000 total, between the two of them, to maintain the household of a Her Royal Highness, performing royal duties on the Queen's behalf. Kensington Palace provided as a grace and favor apartment, White Lodge in Richmond Park on long-term loan from the Crown, 2 homes, neither owned, and an income that required no mistakes to break even. Mary Adelaide made many mistakes. She was, by her late 20s, substantially overweight. Contemporary accounts aren't gentle about this. James Pope Hennessy's authorized biography notes that in later years, she became so large that attending her daughter's dancing lessons required the support of at least a couple of chairs. The Victorian press had already found their term for her by the time she was 30, Fat Mary, printed without apparent reluctance in newspapers and circulated freely in private correspondence. It stuck the way things stick when everyone agrees not to dispute them. She was also, by the same contemporary accounts, genuinely warm, funny, and popular, in ways that complicated the pity. Pope Hennessy describes her as good-natured and unself-conscious and jolly, winning the affection of the London crowd by her broad smiles and expansive waves and bows. She patronized dozens of charities, Barnardo's, children's causes, the London Needlework Guild. She loved people, and they loved her back. She had, in Pope Hennessy's phrase, a single serious fault. She could never begin to learn the value of money. As the years accumulated, 25, 28, 30, the marriage market grew quieter. Her royal rank prevented her from marrying below her station. Her weight and her finances apparently prevented most eligible men above it. She occupied the position of someone too grand for one world and not appealing enough for the other, growing older every season. Queen Victoria felt the situation. The Queen was fond of her cousin. She was also determined, and her determination eventually produced a solution. In 1865, the Prince of Wales and Princess Alexandra visited the Austrian imperial court in Vienna. Among the officers there was a young man named Francis, Count Francis von Hörnstein, styled Prince of Teck since 1863 by the grace of the King of Württemberg. He was known at the Austrian court as Der schöne Ulan, the handsome cavalry officer. Every available account confirms he was extraordinarily good-looking. He was also entirely without prospects by dynastic standards. His father, Duke Alexander of Württemberg, had contracted a morganatic marriage in 1835 with a Hungarian noblewoman, Countess Claudine Rede von Quirede, a woman of distinguished lineage who had come to a terrible end when she was trampled to death by a cavalry charge at a military review. Their son Francis carried the stigma of that morganatic union throughout his life. Under German law, he had no succession rights to Württemberg. He held no hereditary rank beyond what the King of Württemberg chose to grant him. He had no independent income. What he had was beauty, a borrowed title, and the sudden interest of the Prince of Wales. The Prince of Wales invited Francis to England. He arrived on March 6, 1866. He met Princess Mary Adelaide the following day. The wooing was but a short affair, she later wrote. They were engaged within a month. The match was welcomed with visible relief by the court. Mary Adelaide was, in one period description, the only English princess about the court still unmarried. Nobody asked too many questions about what Francis had to offer, because the question of what he offered was somewhat beside the point. They married on June 12, 1866, at St. Anne's Church in Kew, Surrey. Queen Victoria attended. The photographs show her there alongside Princess Helena and Princess Louise. It was officially a happy occasion. Everyone seemed to think it would do, May said much later. And it did. Francis discovered after the wedding that there was no inheritance attached to his wife. Mary Adelaide requested that he be elevated to His Royal Highness. Victoria refused. He remained His Serene Highness for 21 years. Elevated to the Lesser Highness only in 1887 as a Golden Jubilee courtesy, and even that elevation was non-hereditary. In 1871, the King of Württemberg elevated him to Duke of Teck, which was a more impressive title than the one it replaced, but came with no land, no money, and no succession rights. The family was assigned their Grace and Favor apartment at Kensington Palace and the use of White Lodge in Richmond Park. 2 residences on the Queen's terms, at the Queen's pleasure, removable at will. The structural reality of the household was that everything depended on Mary Adelaide's £5,000 parliamentary annuity and whatever supplementary funds her mother could provide, and that the gap between those figures and the cost of living as Her Royal Highness, the Duchess of Teck, would never, under any circumstances, fully close. Princess Victoria Mary of Teck was born on May 26, 1867, in the same room at Kensington Palace where Queen Victoria had been born 48 years and 2 days earlier. Queen Victoria came to visit the infant and noted in a letter that she was a very fine one, with pretty little features and a quantity of hair. The baby was baptized on July 27th by the Archbishop of Canterbury in the Chapel Royal. 3 brothers followed over the next 7 years: Adolphus in 1868, Francis in 1870, Alexander in 1874. May grew up between Kensington Palace and White Lodge. She was educated at home by her mother and by an Alsatian governess named Hélène Bricca, who remained in the family's service into adulthood and later helped educate May's own children. Bricca emphasized wide reading and systematic intellectual preparation. A contemporary account describes the young May as clever, self-willed, and high-spirited, learning everything that was put before her with marvelous intelligence and rapidity. She was the eldest of 4 children and the only girl. She learned, one biographer notes, to exercise her native discretion, firmness, and tact by navigating her brother's arguments. Mary Adelaide brought distinguished visitors to White Lodge and expected May to prepare thoroughly for every encounter. When a Polish poet came to visit, the household story goes, May had Bricca pull every book bearing any connection to Polish literature to ensure she wasn't caught without something to say. She couldn't stand being found wanting. The household had 2 distinct atmospheres. Mary Adelaide's side was warm, genuinely warm, extravagant in affection as in everything else. She took her children with her on charitable visits to the tenements of London's poor. She was present in her children's lives to a degree unusual for women of her class. She also, simultaneously, kept spending. On parties, on travel, on clothes, on entertaining, on charity. Pope Hennessy's biography notes she had the habit of spending up to her income, and then some more on top of that. Francis, through the 1870s and into the 1880s, was retreating. He found solace in gardening and interior decoration, perpetually rearranging the furniture and relocating the bibelots. Contemporary biographers describe him as rather ineffectual. Pope Hennessy is more specific. As the years went on, Francis displayed a tendency to indulge in fits of manic rage. The debts accumulated. Tradesmen wrote letters. The household's financial situation, precarious from the beginning, became progressively more exposed. By 1883, it had become untenable. The creditors had moved from letters to lawyers. Claims had been filed by Paris couturers, by London tradesmen, by the Richmond butchers who had extended credit for White Lodge's kitchen over a period of years. Queen Victoria had received the requests for help and declined them all. Parliament wouldn't intervene. The debt was the Tecks alone, and they couldn't pay it. The family departed England in 1883. They traveled initially as the Count and Countess von Hörnstein, the title drawn from Francis's morganatic ancestry. Modest, anonymous, not royal. It lasted a matter of weeks before Mary Adelaide reverted to her actual style. The attention was better. The service was better. The rooms she was given were better. She simply couldn't sustain the pretense of being ordinary when being extraordinary produced more immediate comfort. Even running from her creditors, she couldn't stop being who she was. They settled in Florence, Italy. May was 15 years old. She spent approximately 2 years there. In Florence, May visited the galleries, the churches, the museums with the disciplined attention Bricca had cultivated in her. She wrote weekly to her great-aunt Augusta, Grand Duchess of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, a correspondence she maintained for decades across the length of the First World War, passing letters through Sweden to reach Augusta in enemy territory Germany. She was already, at 15, a person who maintained her commitments. What she was simultaneously absorbing, in a foreign city under a false name, was the complete anatomy of what could go wrong when the world was watching. Her mother had been publicly pitied in England. The press had noted every step of the financial deterioration. The creditors had gone to court. Everyone knew. The nickname had stuck. The caricatures had circulated. In Florence, at least, nobody was watching. But May was watching everything. The necessity of the borrowed name, the impossibility of her mother sustaining even that small deception, the whole architecture of a royal identity with no financial foundation. The way visible weakness worked, the way it compounded, the way it followed you. The family returned to England in 1885, settling at Chester Square before gradually resuming their position at Kensington Palace and White Lodge. The exile was over. The debts had been partially managed. The creditors, for the moment, were quiet. But the lesson May had absorbed in Florence didn't leave with the furniture. In 1886, May made her debut, introduced at court at 19, beginning the formal social season. Her position was genuinely peculiar. She held HRH through her mother's English royal status, but her father's morganatic background meant that, under German dynastic law, she was technically Serene Highness, the lesser style. The family's finances were notorious. Their social position, while technically elevated, had been the subject of press coverage and court gossip for years. In 1890, Arthur Balfour wrote to Lord Salisbury about the prospect of a match between May and the Prince of Wales's eldest son. The Teck girl they won't have because they hate Teck, and because the vision of Princess Mary haunting Marlborough House makes the Prince of Wales ill. The hostility was specific and documented. Alexandra, Princess of Wales, had not forgiven the family their status or their circumstances. Queen Victoria overruled the objection. She needed a British-born bride of royal rank for Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, eldest son of the Prince of Wales, second in line to the throne. May was the only unmarried British princess not descended from Victoria herself. That made her suitable. Victoria pressed the match and got her way. Albert Victor proposed on December 3, 1891, at Luton Hoo in Bedfordshire, the country residence of the Danish ambassador. May accepted. The engagement was announced. Prince Albert Victor, according to his own tutor, Canon Dalton, was clearly listless, lazy, and intellectually feeble. Those who praised him most could manage dear, good, and kind. Pope Hennessy describes him as backward and utterly listless, self-indulgent and not punctual, as heedless and as aimless as a gleaming goldfish in a crystal bowl. But May wasn't marrying his personality. She was marrying his position. And for Mary Adelaide, the engagement was the culmination of everything. The management, the exile, the maneuvering, the 30 years of refusing to be entirely written off. Her daughter was engaged to the second heir to the British throne. The 15-year-old from the Florence Hotel was going to be queen. Albert Victor died on January 14, 1892, at Sandringham House in Norfolk. Influenza, complicated by pneumonia, part of the pandemic that had been moving through Europe since 1889. He died less than a week after his 28th birthday. The engagement had lasted 42 days. What followed was managed with the quiet efficiency of people who had already decided what needed to happen. Queen Victoria was fond of May. She was also practically minded. The throne needed an heir, and Prince George, Albert Victor's younger brother, now next in line, needed a wife. The family needed the succession settled. Prince George proposed on April 29, 1893. May accepted. Their engagement was announced May 3rd with Victoria's formal blessing. They married on July 6, 1893, at the Chapel Royal, St. James's Palace. George was steadier than his brother in every way, serious, dutiful, devoted. He wrote to May every day they were apart for the rest of their marriage. He never took a mistress. George V is remembered as a difficult man and a demanding father, but not an unfaithful husband. Mary Adelaide watched her daughter become Duchess of York. She had 4 years left. On October 27, 1897, at approximately 3 o'clock in the morning, Princess Mary Adelaide of Cambridge died of heart failure at White Lodge, Richmond Park. She was 63 years old. Beside her were Frances, May, and her youngest son, Alexander. She was buried on November 3rd at the Royal Vault in St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. She died in debt. A newspaper account published in 1910 put the outstanding figure at £70,000. That's a single press report, not account books. And the real total across various sources is genuinely difficult to establish. Whatever the precise amount, the pattern held to the end. The spending had never been brought within the income, and the income had never been sufficient for the life that was required. May was 30 years old. Her father Francis would die at the same White Lodge in January 1900. Queen Victoria would die the following year, and May, the future Queen Mary, daughter of the woman who had been publicly mocked and privately pitied, who had fled England under a borrowed name and died, still in arrears, had her public face to finish building. She had 13 years before she was queen. Those years are where the architecture was completed. The warmth existed, privately, documentably. Recently examined correspondence shows a side of Queen Mary that contrasts sharply with her public reputation. Affectionate letters, genuine humor, intellectual engagement, real feeling. This wasn't repression, it was allocation. What she felt went into letters. What she showed in public was something else entirely, and it was deliberate. Kathleen Woodward, who wrote an intimate study of Queen Mary during her reign with access to people close to the household, captured something essential. She recorded a story of Mary Adelaide at 5 years old, sliding off a garden swing, slapping her chest, and declaring with passionate conviction, "I am English, and I feel it here." Then Woodward observed, "One may be confident, however, that such a story couldn't be told of her daughter, Queen Mary, even at the age of 5. May had not inherited her mother's openness. She had watched her mother's openness get catalogued and pitied and turned into copy, and she had chosen differently. The public Queen Mary was rigidly controlled in expression, immaculate in presentation, and gave almost nothing away. The private Queen Mary ran a household during the First World War with enough efficiency and care that when King George became seriously ill in 1928, one of his doctors was asked who had saved the king's life. He answered, "The Queen." In 1935, preparing his Silver Jubilee speech, George told his speechwriter to put a certain paragraph at the very end. He couldn't trust himself to speak of the Queen when he thought of all he owed her. The iron was real. So was the substance beneath it. When Edward VIII abdicated in December 1936, Queen Mary was 69. She wrote in her diary, "Arrived very late from Fort Belvedere, and Mr. W. Monckton brought him and me the paper drawn up for David's abdication of the throne of this empire, because he wishes to marry Mrs. Simpson." The 6 exclamation marks are in the original. So is the controlled handwriting surrounding them. She could contain her reaction in the grammar without being able to contain it entirely. She never forgave him, or not fully. When the Duke and Duchess of Windsor married on June 3, 1937, no member of the royal family attended. Queen Mary believed the date had been deliberately chosen as a provocation. She declined to meet Wallis Simpson either publicly or privately for the rest of her life. Her position was consistent. Duty came first. Public propriety came first. The institution came first. She had spent 60 years watching what happened when a royal woman let the world see her circumstances, her desperation, her human frailty. Her mother had let the world see everything, and the world had given her a nickname and a lawsuit. After Queen Mary's death in March 1953, her eldest son, the former Edward VIII, by then the Duke of Windsor, wrote to his wife, "My sadness was mixed with incredulity that any mother could have been so hard and cruel towards her eldest son for so many years, and yet so demanding at the end, without relenting a scrap. I'm afraid the fluids in her veins have always been as icy cold as they are now in death." He understood the ice. He didn't quite understand where it came from. The woman he was calling cold had been watching, from the age of 15, what warmth cost. Queen Mary died on March 24, 1953. She was 85 years old. Elizabeth II's coronation was 6 weeks away. Queen Mary had requested and been told she was unlikely to see it. The photographs from her death show the same face she had presented to the world for decades, composed, still, entirely controlled. Whatever was happening behind it had been happening privately for a very long time. She had been 15 years old in a Florentine hotel when her mother abandoned a false name because she couldn't bear the reduction in service. She watched a woman who was HRH, granddaughter of George III, first cousin to the reigning Queen of England, unable to sustain the pretense of being ordinary for more than a few weeks. She watched that same woman come home to England, resume her charities and her crowds and her warmth, and die in debt at 63, with her daughter holding her hand. Queen Mary chose a different equation. She would be exactly what the title required, in public, with nothing visible that could be recorded or mocked or pitied. The warmth she kept for letters, the grief she kept private, the love she expressed as loyalty and duty, which is a real form of love, though a cold-looking one to anyone who didn't know where it came from. She closed herself around what her mother had left open. You can call that coldness. You can also call it the most specific lesson a child ever learned from watching a parent be destroyed by visibility. The iron that people spent 60 years admiring and fearing. Where do you think it came from? It came from Mary Adelaide, from the woman who couldn't stop being seen, from a borrowed name in a Florentine hotel, from the creditors in Richmond, from the press that found a nickname and kept it, from a death at 3 in the morning, still in debt. Her daughter remembered all of it, and nobody ever got to see her remember. If you want more stories like this one, subscribe.